So in order to better understand these ideas and how they can be useful tools, we have a guest with us today, a very special person. Her name is Chloë Davies, and she has agreed to join our conversation today and share her story. So, Chloë, welcome.
I had to unmute myself. Hello again, everyone. It's really nice to be here and have kind of some conversations. I've been seeing faces, and I just like to acknowledge Sandy and to say that we see you, and you know that's totally cool and perfectly okay. And thank you very much for being here in this space. Yeah, I think I got a partner in crime for this bit. Or this is the me talking about myself bit. I'm flying. This is Michael's like, yes, this is the me talking about myself bit. I think the dynamic of what I was going to say is completely changed, and so I think what I'm going to do, if it's okay with you, is kind of just revisit the conversation that I just had with Eduardo, just to kind of.
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay,
I
great.
think that's exactly what we need right now.
Perfect. So we were just kind of talking about the questions that you've gone through, and you know what has brought me here to 2020, kind of very relevant to now for me. So I am refinding my 14-year-old self. At 14, I was pretty badass. I knew exactly who I was, what I wanted from life, fully channeling my creativity. Unfortunately, my cousin, who was my best friend in the whole world, he took his life, and it just made a fundamental knock in who I am. And for lots of different reasons, I became silent. I internalized everything. I stopped talking about my pain. I stopped talking about how I was feeling. I stopped kind of reaching out and engaging in any way other than just surviving. I was acting out. I was acting out in school. My parents really didn't like me during that time. When I was 24, so 10 years later, my granddad on my mum's side passed away, and I ended up having a full mental and emotional breakdown. I was in hospital. They tried to give me tablets, didn't necessarily work. But what did happen, I was working for an amazing organization that said, maybe you should speak to someone. And actually, as part of our employee well-being, before we called it well-being, but in part of our employee benefits, we can allow you to speak to a counselor. So I did. They said, you can have 6 to 12 sessions. I had 13. It's why I have 13 tattooed on my wrist, because you make your own luck. And my therapist, Diane, was amazing, because what she did was to help me speak to myself, to not lie to myself, but to be really honest with myself, and to just sit in my own space, in my own peace, and listen, which for so long when I've been silenced, I actually had forgotten how to listen to myself. I would pretend and, it's deal with something else and not really do that. And so along the way, that wasn't my first. I had another one 4 years later, and that one was much, much worse. And I divorced I didn't divorce myself. I separated from my parents, because sometimes the people that are the closest to us are also the ones that are the ones that need the most work. And so there was a real kind of balance between talking with my family, but them actually seeing me. My dad's my best friend in the whole world, and he would always say, why do you need to go and speak to a stranger? Why can't you come and speak to me? That's like, because you're kind of part of the problem.
You're kind of part of the story, of course.
And I actually don't. If you do it, if you help me, he's like, I know exactly what you need, which was usually right, but I need to kind of find that myself, because I need to own it. If someone else does it for you, then you're like, okay, well, dad's always going to help me out. Dad's always going to help me out. I actually needed to be an adult and do it for myself. So it was really hard. I moved into my grandma's for 6 weeks, and my parents would come, and we would have an hour together for lunch, and then it'd be like, okay, cool, it's nice to see you, and then we'd go. But I think it was great for all of us, because what we did was it reestablished you know, the parent-child relationship in my case, but it also allowed us to actually view each other as people. For me, it was probably one of the healthiest things that we've actually managed to do. And now when we talk to each other, we can really talk to each other without offense, without pain, or have those really hard time talks because we went on that journey together. And so kind of in the beginning of this year, going back to that 14-year-old self part, I was in denial and still hiding her, and still, you know, she's trying to find ways to tell me I'm here, I'm always here, and I just needed to hear her. So I went back to therapy properly, and I was searching for 18 months. I was searching for a therapist who identified in a very similar way to myself. So I'm not going to say her name because she's amazing, but my therapist is Black and queer, and I don't have to spend the first half an hour explaining my very lived experience. I don't have to explain microaggressions. She gets them, and sometimes she gets them before I've even finished explaining what it is that I'm talking about. So this hour that we have together is truly, for the very first time, the most healing of spaces, even when I'm not actually sure what it is that I'm coming to therapy with, or I'm trying to fill the space with so much because I've got so much going on in my head. And she's like, okay, I'm just going to invite in, very much like you did, Eduardo, I'm just going to invite in a breath. I was like, okay, hi. Because I'm always having that, I feel like I'm running out of time. I feel like I've got so much to say because I haven't said it for so long, that I have to fill this space and kind of the pattern and the wave. And so the last 10 months, whilst it has been really hard for me, you know, I've got 2 kids, they're amazing. Being in lockdown with 2 kids is really intense. You know, because like I said, my parents have been my support network and we couldn't be together. We were in 2 separate bubbles. I work in, not only am I LGBT, but I work in the LGBT space and I volunteer in the LGBT space. So when you're fighting for your community in your day job and your gay job, my way of applying self-care has always been by finding and seeking comfort in and with my community. I'm normally doing a team meeting once a month with UK Black Pride, or I'm seeing my friends, or I'm actually going to events and engaging in community engagement. So I get my healing from other people, just like so many of us on the call. And to not be able to do that, especially when you're more marginalized, it has truly been really, really challenging and quite traumatic. And then the additional layers on top of that, in case anyone didn't realize, I'm Black, and I'm a woman. So being in a Black Lives Matter movement that has ignited in ways that none of us would ever have imagined, but also the violence that's faced to Black people, Black LGBTQ plus people, Black trans women in particular, it's been hard to navigate, but also I forgot that I could ask for help. And it was actually my therapist that said, you know, maybe talk to your parents, because I was like, you know, we can't go and see my parents, and I just want to see my mum. And she said, well, why don't you actually ask your parents if they can come to you, because you've got 2 kids, so you can't. It's vulnerable households. My mum was just recovering from breast cancer, and so they did. We stood either side of the fence for, I think it was about 6-7 minutes. They drove up, like, I live in Hertfordshire, they live in East London, so they drove about an hour. We were only together for 6 minutes. The best 6 minutes I had 3 months into lockdown, just to be able to say, like, okay, I'm in this space, we don't need to say anything, but I just needed to see you. And so that part of providing space for myself, also being present in my space, that's my 2020. That, you know, that's my knowing how much space I should be taking up and actually taking it up. You know, that has been the really defining moment for me, really being able to see myself.
Chloë, I was, if I can ask you,
Yeah, of course.
thank you for sharing. This is amazing. Thank you for opening up. we were talking about relationships, and you've mentioned quite a lot. You mentioned
I told you I
like
talk a lot.
no, it's amazing. That's really cool. So you talked about your cousin,
Yeah.
your 14-year-old self, your parents and your grandparents, your therapist, and then you mentioned the queer community as well. So I've got tons of questions, but I was just going to ask you, is there one in particular, or two or three, whatever, that you think were the most vital in your story, or is it a very difficult question to ask?
No, I think they're all interconnected. So it's all
Okay.
family for me. That's the strongest connection.
Family. Okay.
You know, it's the relationship bonds to me are family. My community are my family. And the work that I do, it resonates most when I create family around me. So my work colleagues at myGwork, we are like a family. I work for two identical twins. It's like younger brothers, because I'm actually eldest, but they're like big brothers, younger brothers. You know, from my UK Black Pride, they're my chosen family. They're
So
the family that saved my soul.
So you could say that, I mean, you mentioned the queer community as well.
Yeah,
So do you feel at home there? Like, is that
yeah,
your family in a sense as well?
absolutely. You know,
Okay.
it's the well, this is on two folds, because if you are LGBT or you are aware of the queer community, you know that we are, like many families, dysfunctional, and, and that we are not all united, and there's some work to be done. But that's family. That happens with any family. But the place where you are seen and where keeps you safe, and where actually recognizes who you are and celebrates that. Absolutely. You know,
Okay.
there's
Absolutely.
nothing like my queer community, you know, in particular, not only the Black and brown queer community, but our wider LGBTQ community. My friends are of all faces, all races, all spaces, you know, but those bonds that you build through family, through friendship,
Okay.
those relationships, they're the ones that are the most important for me anyway.
I think quite a few of us relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
We've been mapping ourselves into relationships, and you've done a great job. I was wondering, the next what we're talking about next is curiosity, and you know, the sort of ability that we have to remap, reimagine ourselves. You've gone through a lot, and you've described a very powerful transformation process. You did say there was a breakdown. You mentioned your body at one point, but I'm curious, like, do you have something in particular that was like the alarm that set you up, that said, or was there anything that allowed you to rethink yourself, or to say, I can't go on in the same way that I'm going, or I need,
The first time, no. The first time was my body basically said, I've been trying to talk to you and you're not listening, so now I'm going to make you listen. What I then had, and like I said with Diane, was she allowed me, or she allowed me, but she gave me the skills to be able to listen to myself. So the second time that I had an episode, I knew it was coming. I know what it feels like. I know that my body, I talked about this the other day in a video for MHFA. I get really overwhelmingly tired. I actually feel so detached from my body, and I don't want to move. I don't want to do anything. I just kind of want to be in the cave and stay in the cave. And so I can recognize when an episode is coming, and what I've learned to do from that is how to better navigate through it, because you can't realistically, I can't stop them. What I've learned is that they will come, and they will always come, but how do I navigate through that? How do I do that safely? How do I take care of myself as I'm going through an episode? Sometimes I actually need to stop. Other times I need to speak to someone. You know, sometimes it might actually be reading a book or doing something nice for myself is a way through that. Like I said, this week has been quite tough. And so I came to my parents I came the first night by myself and had a good night's sleep without a child invading the bed, because broken sleep actually, is a massive thing. And then I've had another day, so that now I'm back in my whole world. My kids are back here, but I feel a little bit stronger. and a little bit more at peace with myself to be able to do that. If you'd asked me this question 8 years ago, I wouldn't have had an answer. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it. I would have been really stuck and said, I have no idea, and I have no idea how to help myself. But first and foremost, I have no idea how to ask for help. I've learned that from these experiences, and not being afraid, because that for me has been the biggest thing of, you know, being afraid to ask for help, especially when you are African.
Chloe, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Really. Thank you. Well done. Wow.
Great.
Thank you, Chloe.
Yeah, really, really touching. Yeah, we'll talk about remapping yourself. Right. So